Well, good evening and welcome to The Story. I'm Evan Watson in for Pat Doris tonight. We have many unique stories for you this evening, including a trip down to the KGW vault for some footage from the early 1960s. But first, a big development in eastern Oregon as a lawsuit is filed against the Port of Morrow and others regarding the nitrate contamination of groundwater there. It's our big story tonight. The Story team has covered the groundwater contamination in Morrow and Umatilla counties extensively with our Tainted Waters series. The state of Oregon has known about the problem for 3 decades, but progress towards a meaningful fix has been slow, and even that description may be generous. So instead of more waiting, this week residents lawyered up, filing a class action lawsuit against the Port of Morrow, large commercial farms, and a confined animal feeding operation. Let's give you a brief recap to get you caught up on this issue. We're talking about an area called the Lower Umatilla Basin, 160 miles east of Portland, near the Columbia River. 562 square miles covering northern Umatilla and Morrow counties. The aquifer beneath the ground is contaminated with something called nitrates. They're seeping through the soil into the water. Nitrates come from commercial farms spreading fertilizer, commercial food production spreading nitrate-laden wastewater on farm fields, and large animal operations. As many as 4,500 private wells have drilled down through the surface to get water from the aquifer for drinking and cooking and bathing. But even though the water looks fine, it's full of nitrates. The feds set a safe limit for nitrates of 10 parts per million for all public water systems. We heard from people whose well water tests between 25 and 37 parts per million. And excessive nitrate consumption can cause serious health concerns like cancer, miscarriages, and thyroid issues. So let's get to that lawsuit. It charges that defendants, including the Port of Morrow and some commercial farms, have over-applied fertilizer and nitrogen-rich industrial wastewater to fields in the region, seeping down into the aquifer. And when it comes to the port specifically, the suit alleges they've been violating Oregon DEQ permits repeatedly and intentionally. We touched on that in our Tainted Waters series as well, but check these numbers out. The lawsuit accuses the port of violating its wastewater permit at least 395 times between November 1st of last year and the first week and a half of January of this year. In just those 71 days, those alleged violations average out to more than 5 violations per day. This week, Pat Doris talked with the lawyer representing the Oregonians suing the port.
We've done many reports on the Boardman area and that water problem out there, and I was stunned to find out the state has known about this for more than 30 years and done nothing to stop the continued pollution. Were you surprised by that?
I was not surprised the state hasn't done anything. There's some very powerful agribusinesses in the port that all make a ton of money off dumping this polluted water, and they have a lot of clout. So no, I wasn't surprised. I think it's gone on so long because a lot of the victims are low-income minorities who can't afford to hire lawyers, don't have a voice in politics. As I said earlier today, if this was happening to a wealthy suburb of Portland, it would have been stopped years ago.
The lawsuit hopes to force the port and other businesses to change the way they do things to ensure that all these nitrates are not getting into the water, whether that's through a filter process or otherwise. And if that isn't feasible, the suit says those companies should pay to dig wells for the thousands of homes that use well water in the region. Finally, the suit wants those companies to pay for a medical monitoring program to test the people who've been exposed to contaminated water.
The one thing that keep in mind here is you have Port of Morrow and Lamb Weston that have violated their discharge permits over and over again. And recently the Port of Morrow said, so what, we're going to keep doing it. So not only do you have pollution, but you have people knowing that they're polluting this groundwater and they say they're going to do it anyway. That's outrageous behavior.
Would you hope that a court somewhere would tell them to, I guess, reduce? Because part of the problem, that they've said in the papers and in their press releases, they never have talked to us, but is, look, we've got a going industry here. We can't stop doing what we're doing, for crying out loud.
That's laughable. I'm sorry, I'm laughing. You don't have the right, because you want to make money, to harm other people and their property. That's just basic American law. So if that's their answer, bring it on. Look forward to seeing them in court.
It won't be a quick journey through the courts. After the port and others respond, it'll go to the discovery phase where evidence will be gathered. And then 6 to 8 months after that, the plaintiffs will ask the court to approve the suit as class action, which would fold in everyone who lives in the contaminated area instead of just the 5 residents named in the suit. We asked the Port of Morrow for response to this lawsuit. They wrote to us today, while the port hasn't officially been served with the complaint, we take any actions like this seriously, but reserve the right to respond until after we've had a chance to review the filing. But after our last Tainted Waters story, where we talked with the regional director of the EPA, the port was quick to point out to us that they are not the primary entity responsible for the contamination. They pointed us to this graph from the Oregon DEQ showing estimated sources of nitrate contamination in the area that we've been talking about. You can see that irrigated agriculture makes up the lion's share, nearly 70%. CAFO on the left there stands for confined animal feedlots. And the port would fall under the Food Proc Land App, or Food Processing Land Application, referring to the nitrate-laden wastewater from food processing plants that the port sends out to farmers who then spread that water onto the fields. They told us it's worth noting that industrial wastewater reuse is an accepted environmental strategy in Oregon because it avoids wasting a water resource and putting further pressure on limited water sources in our region. The state has fined the port more than $2 million for wastewater permit violations so far. And port officials say they're working on a $500 million project to reduce the nitrates in their wastewater before sending it out to farmers. That's set to be completed in 2025, with the port claiming the water will then meet or exceed the DEQ's nitrate standards. So what do you think about this lawsuit? Should the Port of Morrow and other commercial industries there be paying for people to drill deeper wells in order to access groundwater that isn't full of nitrates? Let us know. Email the story at kgw.com or call and leave a voicemail 503-226-5090. Now to an update on Multnomah County's ambulance response problems. Today, commissioners approved an assessment of the ambulance service plan. What's that mean? It's essentially a way to take a slower, careful approach and evaluate the system before making any changes. You may ask, why has this step taken this long? We've reported on these problems for more than a year now, and county leaders have been well aware. Commissioner Julia Brim-Edwards had a similar thought, and while she supported this action today, she said she feels it's not enough as ambulance response times are poor and people are in jeopardy.
Firefighters across the cities and family members of those who've suffered from delayed response times have been raising this issue for more than a year. So having a vote just on an assessment of the ambulance service plan is inadequate. If it's not changing the staffing model, what are the other things, knowing it's a very complex thing, what are the other things we can do to make short-term improvements in our ambulance response times? Because again, I'm not an expert and we can argue about what the staffing model is, but I don't think waiting another year to improve the response time is responsible.
Now, the timeline here is not definitive. Brim-Edwards mentioned waiting a year just then. County EMS leaders say this review should probably take about 9 months. But this probably isn't the only thing the Board of Commissioners will try to do related to ambulance response. There is talk of working on this issue next month with a need for more action in the immediate future. But the board did not support Commissioner Sharon Myron's efforts today to make an immediate temporary switch to a new staffing model of 1 paramedic and 1 EMT. That we've discussed at length here on the story. Meanwhile, a former paramedic and 2 current AMR paramedics spoke to commissioners about why they support keeping the 2 paramedic model. Tim Molman was one of them. We talked to him in April of last year, and he explained why he believes AMR is the problem here.
It is time for change. Our EMS professionals deserve better. Our community deserves better. Allocating these funds is the first step in creating an EMS system that serves the people, not only the profit margin. On the surface, removing the 2 paramedic requirement sounds like a quick, logical fix to the current paramedic shortage. This only treats the symptoms and not the underlying disease. EMS systems across the nation are failing. We keep hearing about the national paramedic shortage. AMR is a national company. Their treatment of EMS providers has created this crisis. EMS providers are no longer willing to be accomplices in such broken systems.
Just want to thank this body for having a respectful conversation on a very, very difficult topic. House Bill 4002, having received the constitutional majority, is declared passed.
The bill to gut Oregon's Measure 110 and recriminalize drugs took a huge step forward today, passing the House of Representatives here in Oregon, overwhelmingly with a vote of 51-7, with 2 lawmakers not in attendance. Now it heads to the Senate, where it's scheduled to have its first hearing tomorrow. After 3 readings, the Senate can take a full vote, and each reading has to be 24 hours apart. So that means it could pass the Senate as early as Tuesday. Sources tell us it will very likely pass that chamber and then head to Governor Kotek's desk. No word yet from her office on if she'll sign this bill or not. The other big update on this subject comes from the group who threatened to put an initiative on the ballot to fully repeal Measure 110 in November if the legislature did not take action. Today, that group announced that if the Senate passes 4002, along with its funding bill for treatment, and if the governor signs those 2 bills, they will withdraw their ballot initiatives, something we'll be watching. Speaking of drugs, today we finally heard from local officials in charge of Portland's 90-day fentanyl state of emergency. About 50 people make up the emergency command team. They've met every morning since the emergency was declared around 30 days ago. While much of the work being done is improving internal communication between bureaus, today they announced they will temporarily close 2 downtown bottle return locations near Southwest Jefferson and 10th.
It only takes a handful of bottle or cans to be traded in for cash to be cycled right back to purchase fentanyl and to keep the cycle going. The intent is not to simply move the problem around the corner in Portland. The chair was very specific about not moving this problem into East County, and the governor was very specific about not moving this to just another city. There is an intent for us to figure out the problem here.
Moving forward, the command team will provide weekly updates. Over the remaining 2 months of the fentanyl emergency, the goal is to create a plan that can continue after this emergency is over, with the hope that it will be an example to other cities dealing with this crisis. Even though 1 month in, few are seeing actual changes.
If they get around to this area, it will be good.
So this is one of the areas they've been targeting.
It is. Well, I still think it's bad.
Blair joins us now. Blair, it's been a month, but we haven't seen much change in regards to fentanyl. But from what you heard today, it almost sounds like going slowly here is intentional.
Evan, this is a complex problem. They're taking things slow, trying out tactics on a temporary basis, seeing how it works. But it's hard, right? The community, including homeless people, they want to see a change. They want to see more resources, more treatment options. The list goes on. For example, late last year, Portland police launched a program where they bring outreach workers to the streets to connect with people addicted to drugs. But that happened less than 10 times since they launched the program. That was actually brought up today. And here's what police and an outreach worker had to say about it.
But that's 10 more times than we had 6 months ago.
Sure, but I mean, look at the problem. You guys have been echoing all day saying it's a huge crisis, it's difficult, and we've gone out 10 times.
It's still 10 more times than we had 6 months ago. I mean, we're moving forward, and as long as we can continue to move forward, we're not moving backwards, and we're helping more and more people every day. I mean, the very first person we helped is still sober today.
We have to do it in a coordinated effort. If we blow up too fast, we're going to have a problem with losing the trust of the individuals we're helping.
All right, so Evan, I want to go back to your other point of how we're a month into this emergency and we haven't seen much change on the streets. Well, today they celebrated some accomplishments. The emergency was declared. First responders reversed 74 overdoses, arrested 7 fentanyl dealers. But these so-called accomplishments, it's unclear if they had anything to do with the fact that there was a state of emergency or if they would have been happening regardless. So another reporter actually brought that up today, asking what has changed in the past month. And here's what they said.
Just to clarify the initial question about what's changed in the last 30 days versus some of these programs that were already happening. Are you saying that saturation effort is new, the arrests are new, or, I mean, it seems like some of that was happening before.
Some of it was happening before. It wasn't coordinated, and I think the saturation effort is a key point.
And so it's the communication piece that has changed significantly, and now people understand what everybody's roles are on a daily basis. Does that answer your question better?
All right, so as you can see here, this is a slow process. There are so many different voices involved, so many different teams. It's going to probably take some time to see any meaningful change happen in your neighborhood. But that's if this team can get ahead of the addiction crisis, one that is seemingly always on the move. Evan?
Blair, thanks for your diligence on this topic. Up next on the story, many strippers who live in the state of Washington come to Portland to make money because the state laws regulating the industry are so different across the Columbia. We'll share the reasons why, plus an update on a bill in Olympia to make changes as their legislative session nears its end when the story returns. Washington and Oregon are alike in many ways, but when it comes to the strip club industry, there are actually a lot of key differences between the states. All this week, we've told you how dancers in Washington are pushing for workplace protections and a livable wage. Maddie White from our sister station took a trip from Seattle to Portland to show why many strippers choose to come here to the Rose City.
I do these eye exercises to try to get my eyes connected back to my brain.
A stripper's sacrifice.
She hit me so hard, I flew backwards and hit the back of my head.
There's more to it than we realize.
I flew out of the chair.
Especially in the state of Washington.
She came into this front door where security would normally be.
Gypsy Rose's work as a stripper meant sacrificing her safety.
They would have seen her come into the club angry.
That's why many dancers are now pushing for Washington's Senate Bill 6105, which would require club owners to ramp up safety efforts for their dancers. But right now, many clubs struggle to even afford security guards because of a lack of revenue.
All the customers that come in, over half of them that are brand new, get upset there is no alcohol and they'll leave.
Washington's ban on booze sales in strip clubs affects dancers' revenues too.
I love having an audience. I love playing off the audience.
Nova was also born and raised in Western Washington.
There are times where I'll go to work out here, and even though I'm not going negative, I'm still not taking home anything.
Packing up her life?
I do this every week.
Just to make a living.
I was not prepared this morning.
To support herself, she drives from Seattle to Portland each week to work. 300 miles round trip. And Nova's making other sacrifices. She has a young son who stays with his dad when she's away.
That's something that bothers me a lot, is that now I'm further away. Should something happen, It's going to take me a little while to get back home. Getting out of Seattle is one thing, getting through Portland is another.
For a professional pole dancer, she sure does a lot of sitting still. But she's working to turn brake lights
It can be a little stressful.
into spotlights, as dancers like Nova are pushing for that new law that would get them closer to Oregon's way of doing business. Here at Lucky Devil Lounge in Portland, when you lift the curtain on Oregon, you'll find that in crossing state lines,
It's easy to do something you love, you know what I mean?
dancers feel a weight off their strong shoulders.
You get a lot of support from your security staff.
And the industry's pretty tight-knit.
It's heartbreaking.
Ramona's a stripper from Oregon. She says she'd actually heard about Gypsy Rose's assault at a Washington club.
We did kind of hear about that, and it is rough hearing that other girls are having that experience when we do feel so protected here.
Protected here and flourishing.
I do it probably like 3 days a week, and I'm able to pay my bills.
They say it rains in Seattle, but have you ever been to Portland?
The term is called racking out. I've heard that from the dancers, and that's when they make over $1,000.
$1,000 in one night.
I mean, we get a ton of customers from Washington.
So their businesses are raking in the bills as well.
I would say 85% of our revenue is from alcohol, beer, food.
Much of that, he says, goes towards security systems.
Cameras.
And staff.
They walk all the dancers in and out of the club.
Would you be able to afford security if it weren't for alcohol sales?
We wouldn't be able to afford to be open.
So each night, when the curtain falls and the sun sets in Portland, Oregon, that same sun sets.
I've always lived in Kitsap County.
In the Evergreen State.
I'm trying to focus on my future.
But one thing these Washington women won't sacrifice.
This is my home. My family's here, my roots are here.
Is the state they call home.
I will not be moving to Oregon. Like, I have no intentions.
But when it comes to the laws here,
definitely, they need to change.
Their intentions are clear as day.
I have a lot of hope that things will get better.
Senate Bill 6105 passed the State House in Washington Tuesday night, one step closer to becoming law. Now heads back to the Senate for final approval on added amendments. If it passes there, it heads to Governor Jay Inslee's desk for consideration. Stay with us. We're taking a trip to the KGW vault right after this. Well, today's Leap Day also means we get one extra day of Black History Month, and we thought it would be a good time to head into the KGW vault to see what kind of footage we could find in regards to big names in Black history. We found one clip of Coretta Scott King, wife of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Here she is speaking to reporters here in 1961 while she and her husband were in town for speeches at the Civic Auditorium, Vancouver Avenue First Baptist Church in Portland State, talking about the fight for civil rights.
Somehow I have felt that all along what we were doing was right, and I've gone on with the faith that when you believe in what you're doing and you stand up for your convictions, then you must be willing to suffer whatever comes. And I think I would add further that if you really believe in a cause enough, you're willing to die for this cause, and one has to come to this point, which I feel that we've come to. My husband has no fear about death. He often says, it doesn't matter how long you live, but how well you live. And this is what we are trying to do. And if one has to give one's life to a great cause, then I feel that this is a great way to give your life.
Those words almost chilling to hear now in hindsight, considering what would happen to her husband 7 years later in Memphis, Tennessee. Though their fight for equality continues, even today. Well, that is the end of our show for tonight. Thank you for watching. Regrettably, Pat couldn't be here with you tonight, and he's done a lot of work on the Tainted Waters series. So if you have a comment or question for him, go ahead and send it our way. You know how to get in touch with us. The good stuff is coming your way next, and Pat's going to be back with us tomorrow night at The Story here at 6:30. Have a good night.